Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about social cognitive theory. I'm Amy Monahan. Social cognitive theory was first social learning theory and was brought about by Albert Bandura. He was born in 1925 and he continues to be alive today. He is considered the creator and author of social learning theory, now known as social cognitive theory. Here today, we'll talk about it as SCT, makes it a little bit easier. Albert Bandura went beyond behaviorism. He felt that there was more meaning when we talk about humans than for stimuli versus response. So in behaviorism, Skinner, Watson, and Thorndike talked about you give a stimuli, there's an expected response, and that is it ad infinitum. It always happens. However, when talking about humans, there's an overriding complex to that stimuli. Learning is more complex in humans than it is with any other organism. There is success that is not necessarily following that stimuli versus response. So that's where we're at with social cognitive theory. So success that happens in behaviorism does not always correspond with humans. So we have that Pavlov's dog experiment is a good example of behaviorism where the stimuli invokes the same response every single time. So what is different? Different is about choice. So back to what is learning. So learning is the change in mental structures that creates the potential to demonstrate different behaviors. So within there, we have that change in mental structures, which actually is similar to information processing. That's that process of learning. And then we also talk about that demonstrate different behaviors. And that is that part of behaviorism that we know so well. And the third piece is that potential. Potential is the combination of those two other theories put together to make this social cognitive theory. So it is the success of the potential of overriding that stimuli that is successful in learning. So within social cognitive theory, there are three different processes. They're environmental, behavioral, and personal. So under environmental processes, these are outside influences on learning. So social models provide that modeling as a way of learning. So looking at how somebody else is achieving something makes you either want to emulate or by design not emulate if that modeling is how not to do or you choose not to do. So that's one way of modeling. And then we have under that, we have others like instruction, so direct instruction from a teacher, feedback, standards, those standards that the expectation is for the students to learn, and and rewards. So rewards is very similar. It's that choice. So in other words, it's not a requirement, but it is a choice by the student, but it also is a reinforcement from behaviorism. So it kind of overlaps a little bit here. And then there's opportunities for self-evaluation. So that is that reflection piece. So what did I do well? What did I not do well? So above and beyond the feedback that's given, this is from within. So behavioral processes are next. This is what comes from the work. So from the student, what are they doing to create the learning? That's their effort, their persistence, and their achievement, what they actually achieve. But on the other end, in our behavioral processes, there are two that come from outside. So that choice of activities is a classroom piece or a teacher piece, and that environmental regulation, which is also a teacher classroom piece. So what does that look like? That can be the structure of the classroom. So when you come in, make sure that you do the bell ringer on the wall, and we always do an exit ticket. Those kinds of things are the environmental regulation. If that's not there, then the behavioral process does change. So the third process is those personnel processes. So the goals of self-evaluation. So what am I going to look at? So that's personal. What am I going to look at to say whether I've done something well or not well? What are the social comparisons to others? Which is still personal. My personal values that I bring to um, that theory, that piece. So those values that maybe come from home or expectations of a culture, all of those things are values. Outcome expectations. So what are the expectations of the learning of what's going on then and there? Um, this is the attributions. We're going to talk about self-efficacy in a minute. I want to go back to this is that intrinsic motivation. So behavioralism is a lot of extrinsic motivation. If the pigeon hits this piece, they get food. So that comes from the outside. It's not really they want to get that done. But in the difference of social cognitive theory, we really want the person to want to do the learning. So that's where it's very different from behavioralism. It is that compliance versus engagement. So this is a big topic in education right now is you go into a classroom, everybody's sitting, the learning targets on the wall, they're all seem to be doing the worksheet, but are they learning? And so that's that they're doing, it looks good. It looks good to that evaluator that comes in, but is it really where the students need to be? Is it really the learning piece that needs to happen? So that's that compliance versus engagement. And that's very teacher driven. That has to come from the teacher understanding where they need to go and how to get them there. So, and with that in mind, so we go back to this self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is the student-driven piece, that internal motivation, but how do we give them that motivation? That's where the teacher and the classroom come in. So those were the three processes. We had the environmental, behavioral, and the personal. So we're now going to talk about within that process, we have the model of causation. So this is very different from behavioralism because it's a continuous cycle. So you have the triad. So you have environmental, you have the behavioral, and you have personal. So within each of those are stimuli responses. So it's very nonlinear, where behavioralism was very linear. We're going to give you this, and this is the expected outcome. Whereas we're going to give you this and see what the outcome is. That outcome drives another stimuli in a different response, and it's very nonlinear. It can look very interesting in the long part. So it is continuous. It's no ending piece, and it goes back and forth within those three processes. It is not a one-way gate. So let's talk about a couple studies that incorporated this SCT in their literature. So Gaylor and Nicole, they used a adaptive motivation questionnaire. And at first, they differentiated different types of classrooms. So they were either a supportive classroom versus a controlling classroom. So supportive, open-ended on how the standards were going to be learned. It was very student-driven, student-centered. They could choose how they did the learning. Whereas in controlling classrooms, they came in, the teacher did this very much lecture, more so than hands-on in the science classrooms or the career and technical ed classrooms and math classrooms. Those were the three kinds of classrooms. And so they took the supportive versus controlling and they looked at what that motivation questionnaire looked at, and they also looked at how the students did at the end of the year in the standards. So what they found is in those supportive classrooms, those students did better at the end of course exams, but they also were much higher in the adaptive motivation questionnaire. So the controlling classrooms, while they were compliant, possibly, they were good in the classroom, but their grades were not as high, their end of the year was not as high, and they did not test as well on the motivation questionnaire. Both were doing the same standards at the same time. So that's the first study we're going to look at. So the second study is Cervone and all, and they also worked with CTE classrooms and they compared confidence and self-efficacy to their learning gains. So they again looked at how did they do at the end of the year based on how did they feel about how they were going to do at the end of the year. So that's that personal confidence and that self-efficacy. So that personal processes in that triad. So that one, which was personnel. So how do they do knowing with how do they think they should do? And so they did not get very great correlations at the end. And so one of the things that was noticed in the literature is that they didn't clarify the classrooms. Whereas in the last study, they had supportive versus controlling classrooms. It's possible, and it was said in the literature, it was possible that the differences were in the teaching methods, and that was something that they had to control with in the future. It is interesting to note here that the environmental processes are probably a vital key in how well students are looking at the other two legs of that of the processes of SCT. So it's a very complex theory. So when we're starting to look at adapting to the classroom, where are we going from here? So what can we take from what we've learned? So motivation is key. Where it's compliant versus engaged, which are we doing in the classroom? And while STEM education is all about hands-on, student-centered, open-ended, real world, does that fill the spots that we need to make sure the social cognitive theory is working well with our students? Are they intrinsically motivated or are they extrinsically motivated? And one of the things that was noted in the research along the way was elementary works really well with extrinsically motivated. You can give them little treats, you can give them little toys, you can do that. But as we're going up, the high school level is not as clear cut about using outside influences to get students to learn. So that's something to look at and how we work in the classroom to get students at their final destination. Thank you. And here are my references. And here are some more references. Thank you. I appreciate all your time and listening to what I had to say today, and have a great day.